Today's interview with Sophie Kneebone is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/OCG. That's audibletrial.com/OCG. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Overcoming Graduation with Brian Drury, a show where I work to teach you everything I wished I'd known about life to help you graduate to the next level. Today my guest comes to us all the way from Australia and goes by the name of Sophie Kneebone. Now Sophie is a performer, comedian, and actress. She works at Omny Studios and has recently decided to go back to school to continue her studies. So how can she possibly do all of these things and find success in them? Well, would you believe that it all began when she entered university back in Australia to study law, and she thought she was on what would be a logical progression. She was always a person that got great marks, and people with great marks went on to become things like lawyers or something similar, and then they were successful. But very quickly, she realized that law was not right for her. So what did she switch into? Drama and performing arts. Now, those two things couldn't be much further apart, but in performing, Sophie found her passion. After 2 years at school, she decided to step away from university to focus on her art full time. She has performed all over Australia. She's done shows with friends, written and performed her own shows, and even written and performed 2 solo shows. One of the biggest challenges she faced was getting past the crippling self-doubt about not being on a conventional path. And eventually, she was drawn to Omny Studio, a company that is all about podcasting, which sparked her interest in technology, which she learned on the fly while working. So finally, she decided she wanted to go back to uni and is now deep in the technology and business world and loving it. In today's interview, Sophie will discuss, should you be a specialist or a generalist? And she'll offer one of the most valuable pieces of advice I've heard yet on this show. Why she started in a law degree at university, which she calls uni in the lovely Australian accent that you'll get to hear, and then why she switched to drama and performing arts. Why she stepped away from college, knowing that one day she wanted to go back, as well as the benefits she has now being an adult learner in university. Some of the most important lessons she learned from being a performer on stage in Australia. Why she decides to do the things that scare her most as much as possible. Her most important lesson to find success in any field, whether it be performing arts or at a large corporation, and her top 3 pieces of advice to start a successful podcast, and so much more. So if you're interested in combining the things you love, you're interested in podcasting, if you're interested in doing the things that scare you most and learning why that's so important in life, today's show is the show for you. I had a lovely conversation with Sophie. She's a fantastic person. So without any further ado, allow me to introduce you to Sophie Kneebone. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Overcoming Graduation. So today my guest is coming to us all the way from Australia. We had quite a bit of a challenge getting this one scheduled, but we finally got it on the calendar. So today I'd like to welcome Sophie Kneebone. So Sophie, thank you for being on the show today.
Hey, no worries. Thanks for having me.
I can't wait to hear all of the Australian euphemisms and different things. Just no worries and wicked already. I'm excited. So Sophie...
It's pretty much just shortening every word possible. That's how you speak Australian.
Well, that works out really well for me being from New Jersey because we're always giving people nicknames and trying to say things shorter, faster. So we're gonna get along fine. My accent's just a little less interesting.
Yeah. That's exactly what we do.
So Sophie and I met at Podcast Movement, and after a short discussion with her, I thought she would be a great guest to have on because she gave a presentation that was fascinating, and I learned a ton. So for anybody listening, this is a great one to listen to learn about podcasting, about how to grow, about great practices in terms of the things that you should do to really get your message out to more people. Sophie is an expert in this stuff, and I'm really excited to hear her story and how she got into the work she's doing today. So Sophie let me know in pre-show that she kicked off her professional career after 2 years of university. So Sophie, I'd like to start off there and talk a little bit about what you studied in school and what was your first step out of school like into the real world.
Yeah, great. Well, it was an interesting journey actually because I actually started off when I went to uni for the first time. I actually started off studying law, and I did one semester of law and didn't like it at all. It was funny because it was one of those ones where like I'd gotten good marks at school and I didn't really know what I wanted to do, and so it kind of seemed like the natural thing to go into a law degree, which I think a lot of students do. I didn't like it at all. It was very boring. I really respect people who can stick with a law degree because I couldn't. So there was that, and then about a semester into my law degree, I realised that I wasn't enjoying it, and I was like, well, look, what am I here for if I'm not, if I don't feel like I'm going to be doing this? Like I couldn't see myself being a lawyer for the rest of my life, for example. So I just couldn't see what I'd be getting out of it. So I transferred into a drama degree, so like performing arts, because that was deep down, that was what I'd always wanted to do. All through high school and everything, I'd always done a lot of theatre, and it was what got me the most excited, basically. So so I did that for a year and a half. So I did 2 years of uni altogether. And then it's an interesting one studying performing arts because it's such a practical degree, and I got to a stage where I was performing a lot. I was actually starting to build my career kind of in the Melbourne comedy scene and in the theatre scene. And I got to the stage where I realised that being at university was taking away time that I could be spending on actually performing and actually, building up my networks and meeting people and putting on shows and writing stuff. So I decided to defer for a year, and then I didn't go back until this year.
Very interesting. And I think that is, so like, as we're going through, whenever I catch something, I didn't say this in pre-show, so listeners, you'll get this as a sample, but anytime there's something that I think is a particularly interesting point, I'll pause you, I'll jump in, and then we'll keep rolling there. So listeners, you got a little behind the scenes look, but what I think is really interesting and fascinating there is this is something I've heard many times on this show, is that a traditional education was limiting a person's ability to pursue what they knew they really wanted to do. So it's a big misconception that university is the right thing for everyone and that everyone should go and get a full degree and stay all 4 years, because there are often times where going to university or college, or as you guys call it, uni, that
I told you we shorten everything.
Exactly. I'm starting to see it now. But that doing that will be the gateway into everything else. But many of the people I've had on this show have demonstrated the reality that if you're already creating a living, creating success, creating connections, that school and the time that you're committing to that may be better spent at something else. And you're the perfect example that you've decided to go back now a few years later, that you can go back at any time. Like college isn't going anywhere, but the opportunities that you may be creating could be something that is once in a lifetime. I don't like to go with once in a lifetime because that makes it seem like things are going to disappear, but it could be a massive opportunity. So can you tell the listeners a little bit about like what it was like working in the theater industry, and what were some of your favorite parts and some of the most challenging parts?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I think I was quite lucky in that I joined one particular comedy group, and that opened up a lot of doors for me. And that meant that I sort of met so many people that I still work with today. I'm sure we'll get to that later, but it had a real snowball effect on my life. And I ended up, getting the confidence to write my own show and perform 2 solo shows and that I wrote and did all myself. So that's the kind of thing that I never would have been able to do if I just stuck to a traditional path, I kind of had to go with my instinct a little bit and trust that what I was doing was the right thing. But conversely, the hardest part of that was accepting that I wasn't following that traditional path that all my friends from high school were, and I had a lot of a crippling self-doubt about, essentially dropping out of uni and deciding not to go back, and I had to really battle with this feeling that I'd failed in some way, even though I knew deep down it just wasn't for me at that time and that I was doing something different. Right. It's still so deeply entrenched, I think, in us, that belief that you finish school and then you go to university and you get your degree and then you climb the career ladder. That kind of progression is very deeply embedded in our kind of mindset. So that was definitely the hardest part. But I knew deep down that I would go back to uni one day if there was something that I wanted to learn that I felt like I could only learn at university, and that's what I've ended up doing. But I'm so happy that I followed the path that I did. You know, like I'm so lucky that my parents, for example, all through my life have just been like, yeah, okay, if that's what you want to do, we trust your judgment. And I think that's led me to a really good place now.
And I think that's a really important point, because when you decide to take a non-traditional path, I think if you talk about entrepreneurship, for example, entrepreneurship right now is very sexy, and everyone is like, ooh, I need to be an entrepreneur, and I'm going to be like Gary Vee, and I'm just going to be crushing it and making tons of money and talking to millions of people all the time. And one of the things that really doesn't get talked about on the Instagram pages or on the Facebook posts about, like, go out, pursue your dream, take the leap, very infrequently do people talk about the realities of the naysayers and the negative people in the world. And what's really interesting about it is as you grow and as you become more popular and more well-known, the negative voices become greater, because especially even the scary thing that I've heard many times on this show is that it's sometimes the people closest to you will distance themselves the most, because you're living your dream is challenging what they believe is possible, and it's harder. Rather than embrace what they like, oh, if Sophie can do it, then I can do it, they want to push it away or tell you that you can't do it so that they don't have to change their reality. So I think that's a really great point that you bring up, because for all the listeners out there, when you consider what you want to do and anything that's untraditional, that's outside the norm, more often than not, I mean, this really depends on your circle, but more often than not, the people around you will look at you and say, like, really, are you sure? Is that something you want to do? I even had people do that when I was making a video resume, which isn't a totally outlandish thing, but it was so outside of what they saw as normal or common that people would kind of push back. And that's what ended up getting me a dream job. So for all the listeners, as Sophie said, there will be naysayers. There will be people that try to put down your ideas, your thoughts, your passions, but when you know it's right inside of you, keep pushing for it and keep challenging yourself to not be limited by those beliefs, because even with that fear and that crippling self-doubt that Sophie talked about, she still pushed through and did it, and is so grateful she did, and you will be too. So now, Sophie, you said you put on 2 solo shows, so that means it's literally just an entire show written and performed by you?
Yeah.
Okay.
And the first one that I did was inspired by something that I'd done at uni. So, you know, I was glad that I did those 2 years because it led somewhere. But yeah, the first one, they were both sort of character comedies. So they both had like lots of characters, and I played them all. It was a great time. It was a great time. It was really challenging, but just something that I really wanted to do. And it is something that's in these kind of circles like you, it's seen as a very difficult thing to do, to put on an hour-length show. And I had this year where my mentality was to do the thing that was the scariest, you know, like find the thing that scared me the most and then do that. And that year, the first solo show, that was that thing. So that's what kind of led me to do that. But yeah, it was. But then, you know, it's a solo show, but it never gets put on entirely by yourself. You know, I had an amazing friend direct my first one, and he helped me so much with it, and just lots of people supporting. You know, my parents supported, everybody supported. So I don't think you really get anywhere by yourself completely. You know, like asking for help is one of the biggest things that I've learned in the last few years is that it's okay to ask for help, and people like being asked for help. You know, people like it when you go to them and go, hey, I really respect what you're doing. Can you help me? And 9 times out of 10, the answer will be yes.
Right. Because we all have this perception that if we ask for help, that people are going to be like, oh, I don't have time for this, or they're going to be like, why are you asking me? But in reality, the response is often so different. I mean, I've even had people reach out to me and say, hey, Brian, I don't want to waste your time, but, you know, I'm really working on getting my fitness on track, or how do I even start to write a book? And I'm like, no, this is why I created this business. Like, this is like, I want those ambitious, driven people to reach out to me, because those are the people that I'm working to serve. So I think that takes an incredible amount of courage to do that, because it's one thing to be on stage and performing, but to be doing a show entirely by yourself, playing all of the characters, to me, it's like, it's hard to even fathom. I've actually never seen that done. So I give you a lot of credit. And the point that you said about do the thing that scares you most, that is one of the most powerful pieces of advice. Now, for all the listeners, on the other side of your fear is a lot of freedom. And I've been working with my coach currently to do this a lot lately, and it really pushes you out of your comfort zone. I mean, Sophie, when you started planning this and organizing this, how far out of your comfort zone were you stepping by taking on this challenge?
Oh, so far, so far. And that was why I was so lucky to be working with my friend Lee, who directed it, because every time I'd start to spiral into it, I can't do this, he'd pull me right back, and he'd help me to remember why I wanted to do it in the first place. Because wanting to do it comes from an inherent belief that you can, somewhere deep down I knew that I could pull it off. And you just have to keep reminding yourself of that and surround yourself with people who will help you to remind yourself when you're a bit too far gone.
That is, like, you're dropping so many wonderful pieces of advice in throughout this whole thing. This is fantastic. You're doing my job for me. I'll just sit back and let you do the interview. You can interview yourself. It'll be another one-woman show.
Overcoming graduation with Sophie Kneebone.
Hey, you watch it. Hey, you don't have red hair. You can't hold the mic here, Sophie. Okay, but. The other lesson that you just brought up that is so critical is, one, asking for help, but two, surrounding yourself with great, supportive, ambitious, driven people who will not only support you, but they'll also call you on your bullshit. Like when you said, I can't do this, your friend's like, yeah, you absolutely can.
Yeah.
And you're like,
yeah, totally.
Okay, all right, I guess I can. Because when we get in our own heads, we're very good at convincing ourselves of things that will keep us in our comfort zone. But having those friends that challenge you, it's like the friend, like when you're like, I don't want to get up and do a workout, and your friend's like, dude, you can't leave me hanging. And you're like, okay, I can do this, and just having those great people in your environment is so critical. So, all right.
Totally.
So out of your time, are you still doing theater and drama as a side thing?
I am, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
I am. Ultimately, we haven't sort of got to what I'm doing now, but ultimately what I'm going to end up doing is combining entertainment and technology in cool new ways that don't exist yet. So that's kind of the path that I'm following now. But yeah, I'm doing a lot of writing and doing, performing a lot of comedy still. So yeah, I fit it in.
That's, again, another lesson of synthesizing the different lessons we've learned in our life, not treating anything as irrelevant or a waste of time, or that's something I did in the past. It's looking for ways to combine the different things that we find exciting and engaging and make something new rather than just do what's been done. That's what you're looking for, is how do I combine all of these different facets of me that I enjoy, that excite me, that light me up, and bring them to the world in a new way. So with all of your experience on the stage, I'm curious, can you give us the best memory you have? Like, what was the best show, the best performance, the thing that you were on stage and it just felt right, and at the end of it you were like, this is why I do this?
That's such an interesting question. The first one that comes to mind is, surprisingly, it was one of the nights that I was performing my first solo show. The show was called Brave Face. And I was not in the mood. Like, I got there, and I was like midway through the season, and I was like, I hate this, I'm tired, I don't want to do it tonight. I had hardly any tickets sold. I think I had one ticket sold, actually. And it was in quite a small room, it was like a 30-seat room, but, I just wasn't feeling it. And then, of course, I did the show, and I ended up having 4 people in the audience, which was the lowest audience I think I've ever had. And like the rest of the season, like, sold quite well, but that particular night, it was like a Wednesday night, midway,
right.
Hard to get people down. And I had 4 people in the crowd. And because I was in such a rubbish mood, I had to kind of really kickstart myself. And I got onto the stage and I did it, and I was like, you know what? I'm here, these 4 people have come to see me, they want to see the show, I'm going to give them a good show. And it ended up being the best show of the season. Like, I just felt like it just really clicked, and I just felt like I really kind of connected with it and done a great job. And that was really interesting for me, because it was like, it reminded me of why I was actually doing it, like I don't want to do this stuff for massive crowds, and obviously that's a really nice side perk of it, but really what I was doing it was to I thought of a little story that I wanted to tell, and I wanted to tell the story, and those people had come, and it didn't matter that there was only 4 of them. I just felt really good about it. So yeah, I don't know, that was one of that I always think back to that when I'm starting to I get discouraged about ticket sales or whatever it might be, because I think that you can get a lot of benefit from these kinds of things in really unexpected ways. Like, I wasn't expecting that show to be so fulfilling, but it really was.
I love.
So yeah, that's the first one that comes to mind.
I love that your favorite show was one of the nights that you wanted to perform the least, because what I think is it's so critical in terms of our development and growing and really pushing into new levels in our life. Like, anybody can perform when everything's going right, whether it's a sport, at the office, or on stage. When you're on point and your energy's high and you had a great day and you found $5, everything's just rolling and feels fantastic. But it's those days where you almost don't even feel like you want to get out of bed, but yet you've made a commitment. And the other piece here is that when you place impact over money or audience or downloads, all of a sudden your perception of what you're doing becomes very different. Because when I started this podcast, I started to get really hung up in downloads, and every month it had to be more, and I stopped treating the downloads as people, and it was just a metric, and when the metric didn't go up, I was sad, and when it did go up, I was happy. And it's like that was that when I really kind of looked at it and reframed it, I said, I didn't do this to get thousands of downloads. I did this to impact people's lives, and I did this to bring my unique message to the world. And in that same way, you said these people paid and came to see the show, and they don't, like, you didn't devalue them because the number of them was less. You decided that you were going to put on the best show you could, and all of a sudden it became one of your greatest memories on stage. I think that's absolutely phenomenal. That's just such a wonderful thing. So what I'd also like to hear, if you're willing to share, is one of the worst nights on stage. And the reason I want to hear that is because often these stories are fun to reflect on in the like once they're in the past. But also, what was the biggest lesson you learned from this most challenging night?
I think there was like having flashbacks now of like difficult times on stage. There's one show where I think, interestingly, I think it was really tough because we got too hung up on things like ticket sales, like you were just saying before. We got too hung up on the numbers and forgot why we were actually doing it. There was one show last year, I'd written a sketch show with 3 of my really good friends, and it was just a difficult season. Like, we were really struggling to shift tickets. The show was really good, like we knew that it was really good. And the last show of the season, I don't know if you follow AFL football, but it was the day of the AFL Grand Final, which is a traditionally very difficult day to get people to come to a theatre show because everyone's watching the footy and everyone's, you know, having barbecues and having a great time with their friends. So we'd sold no tickets, and we didn't know if we were going to have to cancel or not. And the 2 guys in our group, they'd been to the grand final that day, like actually gone and watched it live because their team was playing in it, and it was a massive deal for this team to be playing in it. It was the Eagles from Perth, and they were so excited, and the Eagles lost quite badly. They had to then come and do this show for which we'd sold no tickets, which we were exhausted by the end of this terrible season that we'd had. And they turned up, and we were all just so flat and so sad. And it wasn't right up until right up at the last second that we knew that we were going to go on, because we hadn't sold any tickets. And then right at the last minute, by the time we actually said, yeah, okay, we're cancelling, suddenly 6 people turned up.
Wow.
And then we had to kind of shift into this, oh God, we're doing this show. And look, the show that night was fine. It wasn't our best for sure, but it wasn't our worst necessarily, but it was definitely like the most kind of negative circumstances of done showing. And we were all just so tired of it. And you know, after that night, we all just went and had beers, and we talked it all through, and we were fine, and we had a big laugh about how terrible it had been. But that was an example of like we were kind of slogging through it and doing it, even though something in the passion had died a little bit. Like we'd written this show and we wanted to perform it to people, but something kind of had gone a bit wrong. You know, the balance was just a bit off. And I think that was the time when we all just went, okay, well, let's take a little break and figure out what's going to make this exciting again, you know, which is always a good moment to get to, I think, because when you get to the point when it's not fun anymore, then you should reevaluate, especially when you're doing something creative. Like, it should be fun. Like, not all parts of it are fun, but overall, like, there should be a passion and fun driving me, I think, and that wasn't there anymore at that stage. But then we picked ourselves up and we did another season of it again a few months later, and that was great. So, yeah, sometimes you just got to give yourself a break, I think.
Yes, and that lesson you just shared, I think you extrapolate that out to life, and that completely reframes the way that the world looks. Because if things aren't fun, why are you doing them? And people, I got to pay the bills. Well, I got to do this. And it's like, and I agree, in a creative field, it can be even more important at times. But I really think the more creatively we can approach life, the more fun we can create. And when we wait for fun to come and we just expect somebody else to bring the fun into our life, then it's like waiting for somebody else to bring joy into our life, or like the ideal person to date. It's like we've got to create those things in our life. So having that conversation, most people don't do that. Most people don't sit down and say, you know what? I'm not having as much fun. What can we do to increase the amount of fun? And because you guys were in that space, you just said, you know what? Tonight wasn't it. What can we do differently? And all of a sudden, the excitement comes back. The spark in life comes back when we're willing to reevaluate rather than waiting for somebody else to fill in the blanks for us. And Sophie, we actually had a guest come on that I did not tell you about I didn't tell you a lot in pre-show. I just kept a lot of this in the dark. But I live right next to the train tracks, and whenever the train comes by, there's a character on my show named Donna. And what Donna likes to do is promote my guests. So if the listeners want to come and learn more about you or reach out, connect to you now, and this is actually a good segue to go into what you're currently doing, but where can listeners come to learn more about you and be able to see more of the things you're currently working on?
A great way to find me is on Twitter, because I'm always posting on Twitter everything that I'm doing. So on Twitter, I'm just Sophie Kneebone. It's all one word, and my last name is literally Kneebone. I believe me, it's easy to remember. So at Sophie Kneebone is me on Twitter. That's the easiest place to find me. And then also, you're right, this is a good segue actually. The job that I'm doing right now is working for a company called Omny Studios. So people can look, especially podcasters, can look us up. Our website is just omnystudio.com, and we've got Facebook and Twitter and all that kind of thing as well. But we work with podcasters, so definitely look us up there and you can find out a lot about what I'm doing over there.
Fantastic. And for all the listeners, that'll be included in the show notes. And thank you, Donna, for that wonderful transition moment. So, you were working in theater. You had all kinds of ups and downs, and even what you thought would be your worst show was one of your best, and then all these lessons that came through it. Where was the transition to go into a different type of job? Like, what was the desire to do it, and was Omny Studio the first step?
It definitely was. So what happened was, I kind of got to a point where when you're freelancing as an actor, which is what I was doing, you're essentially running a small business. Like you're running yourself as a business, and I really liked that stuff. Like I was working with a couple of different companies that I'd either was a part of or had helped start, things like that. I always really liked negotiating fees and the marketing side of it, all that kind of thing. And I wanted to start learning more about business, essentially, and finding out what I could contribute to that space and how I could improve myself in that way. And so I thought about going back to uni, actually, but then this job came up that was, it's a Melbourne startup, and a friend of mine was working there, and I interviewed for it, and I ended up getting, a couple of hours a week there, and this was Omny. And that was really cool because it was a really creative job in that we were creating a new tech platform, and we were talking to lots of different people all the time and getting lots of feedback and getting lots of advice and making the platform the best it could be. And I also got first-hand experience of the business side of stuff. So I was working in the business development department, and it was a really kind of perfect mesh for me of all the things that I wanted to learn more about, and all the things that I was doing already, because my background in creative content was perfect for coming in and advising podcasters on just writing content and doing content and building audiences and things like that. So that's sort of what I started doing. And so like essentially what Omny Studio does is it's a software platform for any kind of audio on demand, so radio and podcasting, essentially. I now work with all of our podcasters. I manage all our podcasting relationships and make sure that, you know, people's feature requests are getting met and things like that. But we also work with radio stations as well. Like the software automatically captures just like the spoken content that goes to air. Mm-hmm. But what we do is a podcast hosting platform. So we take care of all of the technical stuff that often I think people find a bit overwhelming and frightening. Mm-hmm. Maybe like they want to start a podcast, but they don't know how, you know, an RSS feed works. That's the kind of stuff that we do, which has been really cool because I suddenly got exposed to this tech world that I already knew I really liked technology, and I knew that I would have interest in, you know, computers and things like that, but I never really thought that I could be, I'd never really considered that I could be good at it or understand it or be able to explain it. And this job really catapulted me into this environment where I suddenly could, and I was understanding how the software worked, and I was explaining it to other people, and that's kind of what led me to be studying computer science, which is what I'm doing now. Mm-hmm. And then ultimately what I want to do is combine, like I said before, entertainment and creative content and cool technology to make stuff that doesn't even exist yet, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really fascinating because it's so untraditional, is going from drama and performing to a completely tech-driven world, very businessy. Yeah. So what have been some of your favorite things that you've learned that maybe surprised you about both the business and the tech world? Because I know if I went into drama from my current job, there would be so many things I wouldn't expect that I'd learn on the fly. Yeah. So what have been some of the most interesting things that you've learned, or maybe the biggest misconceptions you had about the business world and the tech world?
I was pleasantly surprised, and I continue to be pleasantly surprised by how generous everybody is. You know, everybody is so generous with their time and their knowledge. And again, it comes back to that thing of asking for help. You know, like I used to get into a mindset of if I asked for help, then I'd appear weak or vulnerable, and I didn't want to show that. But it's actually totally fine to have that vulnerability and be like, hey, I'm not sure how to do this. Can you show me? Mm-hmm. Because there's nothing to be ashamed about not knowing something if you've never learned or if no one's ever taught you. You know, like You can't be expected to just know stuff. So being able to admit that you don't know how something works or you don't know how to do something and ask for help is a massive step to take. And I think when I got to the point of being able to do that, especially in this brand new tech world that I had really no experience in, then that was a big turning point for me because my learning just exploded. Mm-hmm. When I was finally able to say, hey, I don't understand something. Because you don't understand something and then you learn it and then you do and then you find. Right. I think that was the best lesson that I learned, because I had this feeling that the business world was going to be intimidating and scary, and some of it's like that, but you just deal with it. You just keep going and hold your head up and just keep on going, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Many people will and do go into the business world and try to act like they know a lot more than they do. I was one of those people. I was using businessy words because I thought I had to do that to be taken seriously, even if I didn't know what they really meant. It's just other people said that and I kind of had an idea, and people would ask me what I meant, and then I'd just try and change the subject, because we have this perception that if we don't know everything about business when we come in, that people won't take us seriously. They'll treat us like that young person that just doesn't get it yet. But what I found is actually the complete opposite. When I was trying to bullshit, people could call me on it and see right through it, and I felt less authentic, and people felt that about me. But when I was willing to say, I really don't know what that is, what is it? Oftentimes it's a one-sentence answer, and now you know what that is, and you can use that knowledge. Or your point.
I think a willingness to learn is the biggest asset you can possibly have.
Absolutely.
Always have your eyes and ears open. Be ready to learn. Always.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you never know who, like if you treat each person like they have something of value to teach you, you would be amazed what the world can bring to you. So listeners, take that piece of advice from Sophie. Like, every single person knows about something more than you. Every single person has some type of knowledge that you could benefit from, be excited about, just get a laugh from. So keep that in mind. And my dad says one of the greatest pieces, or one of the greatest compliments you can give someone is that they're eternally curious. And the more you live your life eternally curious, whether that's in work, in life, in relationships, I think you'll find there will be a lot more joy in life in general. And also, you will learn so many new things that open new doors versus trying to convince people you know everything when really you're just hiding behind your fear of saying that. So don't be afraid to reach out and let people know. So, Sophie, when you started working at Omny Studios and like being so focused on podcasts, as we heard at Podcast Movement, this is a really new world, and it's starting to get some structure around it, but it still is very free and kind of untamed. So I know many people that listen to this show have that desire in them, that creative desire to maybe write a book, to maybe put something out on the internet, but also many of them will want to write or start a podcast. So can you give, because I remember the advice that you gave at Podcast Movement, I was like, I need to implement this like as soon as possible, because I had no idea about so many of the different concepts you talked about, even just the title and how to format the title differently to improve the probability of people finding my show. So can you give the listeners a couple of your best pieces of advice or best tidbits of advice to not only start a podcast, but make it, give it the best chance for success?
Yeah. The first piece of advice I would give is to spend some time really challenging yourself to understand how it works. I know that might sound like a really obvious thing, but understand the technology behind it, because it's not that scary. It's really not. It's really quite straightforward. And if you don't, it's that kind of thing where, you might Google an RSS feed and the answer is, an RSS feed is a text file written in XML, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, I don't know what XML is. I don't know what this is. Just keep digging and keep chipping away at it, because it will make sense, and it will really help when you really know how it works, because then you know how to, you know the best ways to market your episodes and start releasing them at particular times, and the length that you want to go for, and the things like monetizing it if you want to eventually. Like it'll all make a lot more sense. It'll all be much easier. So spend some time understanding how the technology works is my first piece of advice. And then secondly, on the content side, I think you've really got to trust your gut, I think, in terms of what you want to make. If you've got a story to tell, then trust that people will want to listen somewhere. Or if you've got an idea that you want to explore, or a person that you want to interview that you think is going to bring value to someone, then trust that. Like there's a fine line to walk between blatantly going against what people are telling you. If no one's listening or if no one's interested, then maybe it's time to reconsider. But I think that from my years of making content and performing and writing, all that kind of stuff, I know that if you find it genuinely funny, then chances are that other people, there are other people out there that will as well, or if you find it genuinely interesting, then other people will too. So yeah, I think really creating something that's unique to you rather than trying to cater to what people want is the biggest piece of advice I can give in terms of the actual content creation.
100% agree there, because that comes down to, it's when people want to start a business, start a podcast, start a blog. If you start to write based off what you think other people want to hear, what you think will make you the most money the fastest, I've seen that fail. I've experienced that fail for myself more than anything else. And also, you won't have fun doing it because you're not expressing you're not bringing your unique gifts to the world. You're trying to replicate Gary Vee or Tony Robbins or somebody else. Like, the beautiful thing about podcasts too is that there are no barriers to entry. There is no strict requirement on what you can and can't talk about. So if you have an interest, there are podcasts for everything out there. So you could be the first one to create one about a super niche that you think is so funny and so cool. There's there's a name that I'm blanking on. It's the Magic Tavern. Hello from the Magic Tavern is it's this goofiest podcast, but it's hilarious. It's literally a guy who is telling a story about falling through a dimensional rift near Burger King. He falls into a magical land called Foon, and then he interviews the mythical creatures that he runs into. And it is as ridiculous as it sounds, but it has a massive following now. People love it. And it was just three guys who got together one day and said, you know what, I think this would be fun. So to build on Sophie's point, do what you enjoy. Do what you really are being called to do, because if you're doing this outside of your day job, don't make more work for yourself. Make something fun. Make something engaging and interesting. So, Sophie, those are two great pieces to start with. Are there any other big pieces of advice that you have on how to really effectively get started or get your podcast out there?
I think there's a lot of things about things that I touched on in my presentation at Podcast Movement in terms of like the iTunes store, for example. We've got an article about this up on our website, so I won't go super far into it because it's quite lengthy. But it comes back to that concept of understanding how things work. Understand how the iTunes store works, for example. Like the iTunes search algorithm, for example, works by first it searches the titles of the podcast, then author, and then total amount of subscribers of all time. So cramming your title full with a few really well-chosen keywords can help to increase your presence when people search for things. I wouldn't say, I'm not saying spam it, I'm not saying cram it full of 30 or 40 words, full sentences. I just think that, for example, overcoming graduation, interviews with blah, 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 3 or 4 words that really say what the show is about in the title can help. Little things like that. If people want to know more about this stuff, they can go to our blog, which is blog.omnystudio.com, and there's a few really good articles in there that really talk about this kind of stuff in detail. Understanding how things work is my biggest thing.
I love that. And that piece of advice was kind of a game changer for me because by using, and I still haven't done it, of course, but I have done other things in the past few months since we've seen each other. But for me, it was just to many people, we look at the successful podcast, the millions of downloads, and we're like, it looks like blind luck or magic. We're either like, oh, they just got lucky, or they did some crazy thing. But if you understand the way things work, you understand that algorithm is going to look for keywords in your title versus in your description, and then you make that small change, all of a sudden you could have thousands of more people that have access to you that wouldn't have otherwise. I know The Art of Charm does that. That's a podcast that I listen to a lot, and they put social psychology, dating advice, and something else in the title so that people have a little bit more context about what the show's about if they're coming in blind. But again, for the listeners, understanding how things work enables you to do things that people may see and think are impossible or magical or mystical, because many of the people out there that are achieving wild success aren't doing magic or just having blind luck. They've spent the time to really understand how the process works and then create strategies that leverage that understanding. So fantastic, Sophie. So now I want to get into the concept of going back to school, because I think you're the first person I've had on that is actually back in school now, and I want to talk a little bit about that. So what drove you to go, but you touched on this a little bit earlier, but what drove you to head back to school, and what are you hoping to achieve by this continuing education?
So I think I said before, I always said when I stopped going to uni before, I always said that I would go back if there was something that I really wanted to learn about that I didn't feel like I could do on my own, that I felt like I needed the structure of the education system to help me to do that. So when I started in the kind of the tech world, I started looking further and further into it, and I decided to learn a coding language, and I got really, really excited about that stuff, and basically my interest grew to the point where I was like, you know what, I want to have a really in-depth knowledge of this. I'm going to go back to study. And I was lucky because I was able to get credit points for the 2 years I did at uni before. So I've been able to go back and be studying full-time, but actually taking on less subjects, which has been great, because that meant that I could fit in work. I've been working part-time and still performing and pretty much just doing everything that I was already doing, just adding studying to the mix as well, which has been hard. I've learned this year, I might have always been one of those people to take on too much, but I'm getting much better at knowing my limits now. So I'm better at saying no to things now. But yeah, it just felt really right, and I had a lot of self-doubt, a lot of imposter syndrome. At the start of this year, I worked myself into a panic where I was like, I'm going to go to uni and everybody else there is going to know what they're doing and I'm going to have no idea and what am I doing? This is ridiculous. And of course I got there and everybody was in the same boat because everybody's starting at the same point. And I've made some really excellent friends who are at exactly the same level as me, and we all help each other out. And none of us are experts because otherwise we wouldn't be studying first year science, if we were experts, we wouldn't need to. And it's just been really, really great. It's been really great to go back to uni as a mature age student because I have a lot more perspective. I'm not, I already have friends and a social life. I don't need to worry about, it's not the be all and end all of my life. And that has meant that I've found really cool people that I've connected with without freaking out about making best friends for life, that kind of thing.
Right.
I've taken the pressure off myself a lot. Like I just have a lot more perspective and I'm able to approach things from a kind of a more well-rounded way rather than seeing study as being the all-encompassing thing of my life. It's just a part of my life and a part that I really, really love and I'm really glad that I've gone back to.
What I believe is so powerful about that is I know many of the listeners of my show, typically either in college or recently graduated. There's this feeling of I have to go to school. It's the only way. And like you said, it's the end all be all. Like study has to be my life. And then I've got to get a job and then boom. And you're a perfect example of you've got a job on the side. You're working and studying something that you love because you said, you know what? I really want to dive deeper into this level of study. So you're a perfect example of how people are able to go back. It's not that university disappears. It's not that you can never go study again. And even I know lots of people say, I picked the wrong major, I blew it. But how can you take what you learned there? And if you really want to go back to school, pick the thing that you love, that you want to learn about. Or if you don't want to go back to school, how can you self-educate? I mean, we've mentioned a couple of times on this show, follow that curiosity, follow what's really driving you. There's so much information out on the internet. Like Sophie and her team can help you do all of these things much easier. But if you wanted to go and learn what an RSS feed is, you could read all kinds of articles. And Sophie, I did actually exactly that and had the exact reaction you described because it was like, it's XML text. And I'm like, I still don't get it. I still don't. And finally, a friend of mine just said, it's basically something that connects to all your content, so when you publish, it's linked. And I was like, oh, okay, cool, great.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. So yeah, and I think what you said before about being eternally curious is so powerful because like nothing that you learn is ever worthless. You apply everything to every different part of your life. Like I work in the tech world now, and there's a huge emphasis on collaboration and teamwork, and that's exactly what I've learned to do. Writing shows with other people and putting on events with other people. Everything has its place.
And everything has its place and has value if you're willing to have that perspective. Because the people who don't get value from their past experiences are the ones that decide it's worthless, decide it's useless. But if, again, you're willing to change that mindset and say, what could I learn from this, or what did I learn from that, and then creatively apply it to your situation like Sophie has so brilliantly in all these different situations, then all of a sudden life looks very different because that study of this one thing that seems totally different than what you're doing now can be brought in and applied. And a great example, if you study drama in school and ended up in the business world like Sophie, some people might think, they're totally different. There's no connection. Well, I mean, Sophie, how many times are you giving presentations in front of people and you have an ability to make people laugh and you know how to capture an audience, you know how to control their attention, and all of a sudden everyone's like, you know what, I really love Sophie's presentations. I love when she's on stage because it's interesting. It's not just your general death by PowerPoint meeting. So for the listeners, just keep that in mind and keep that perspective of how you can creatively take what you've learned and apply it to whatever you're doing right now. And as Sophie said, and it's a process. It's never ending. It's constantly evolving. So don't ever expect to get to a point when you're done. Just be thirsty to learn and grow and keep experimenting and exploring the world. So fantastic, Sophie. And I can't believe how quickly time has gone, but
I know
we've reached the time for our closing 2 questions. And it's really, I was like, okay, I always have to pay attention to the clock during the interviews just to make sure we don't go for like 4 hours and, I'm keeping you from your family and everything. But, But there's times where we just get so immersed in it that I look up and all of a sudden I'm like, wow, okay, I've got to get the closing questions. And so, we have 2 questions that we do every time on the show. And the first one is a newer edition, and the second one has been around since the show began. And actually, I think Donna is coming by again to say hi. So for the listeners, you may get a little hello from Donna during Sophie's response. But the first question is about young adults specifically, and so many people refer to them as the millennials, or us as the millennials, but millennials will often be in school or be coming out of school thinking they have nothing to offer because they look at job descriptions and they see 3 to 5 years experience and all these certifications. They look at that and say, I have none of these things, so I'm not valuable. But there's so much value that millennials have to offer. So can you talk a little bit about what you think are some of the key, or maybe the key thing that millennials bring to the world that is unique and valuable?
Well, a massive one is the fact that millennials today have grown up with technology that didn't exist even 5 or 10 years ago. I mean, even for me, I'm 25 and I am at uni now with 19-year-olds who grew up with technologies that I didn't have when I was in school. It's changing so rapidly, and so that awareness of being so connected with the world and being connected with people overseas and being able to experience 100 different perspectives in a very short amount of time is huge. Don't underestimate that, and use that to your advantage. We often I think there's this perspective that the internet is making us dumber and social media is ruining relationships and things like that, but it doesn't have to be like that. Millennials have learned to connect with people from all over the place in lots of different ways, and it's a hugely powerful thing. It's something that we can use to our advantage. And I would also say one of the best pieces of advice that I've ever got was, rather than trying to be the best at one thing, I think you touched on this before, Brian, look at a few different areas that you're quite good at and use that combination to make you stand out from the crowd. Because everybody has, rather than trying to be in the top 1% of just one thing. And this is the thing that I read in a blog, and I can't remember the guy's name, and if I do remember it, I'll send his name to you so you can put it in the show notes. But yeah, he talks about being in the top 25% of 3 things and putting those things together to create a unique skill set that only you have to offer. And anything can be, often the things that we're best at are the things that we overlook because we go, oh, that's so easy, everybody can do that because it's so natural to us. So if you're really good at maths, then great, what can you combine maths with? Maybe you're good at maths and you're good at drawing, and there might be something there. Everybody has something to offer because everybody has a completely unique experience. No one else has the experience that you have. No one else has met the people that you have. No one else has the thoughts and the knowledge that you have. So, yeah, everybody's perspective is valid, I think.
Absolutely.
I don't know if that helps.
That's fantastic. And I've never heard that it framed in that way, because many times people will speak about generalists or specialists, and they're like, you can be one or the other. But essentially what you're describing is a general specialist. It's somebody who has a couple key competencies or a couple key skills that they're synthesizing into something totally unique. And I think that's really exciting because that gives you so much more flexibility. So instead of trying to be the best programmer in the world or the best speaker in the world, the guy Sekou Andrews comes to mind. He is a spoken word poet who combined that with motivational speaking and created his own form of motivational speaking called Poetic Voice, and now travels around the world and is speaking to Nike and these major companies and doing his unique thing. And if he just tried to be a speaker, probably wouldn't have had the same impact. If he just tried to be a spoken word poet, but by combining those two pieces, he was able to create something totally new. And I also loved how you said the perception that, social media and technology is making us dumber and people are absorbed in their phones. And I love that you said it can be that, but it doesn't have to be, because we look at our news feeds, and there are times I catch myself scrolling through my news feed on Facebook and getting upset and getting angry and being like, well, look at these posts and look at these things. And I was like, one day I just said, Brian, you have complete control to change that. You can unfollow that person, you can hide those posts. I can cultivate that content. But on the other hand, most people won't do things that are developing and growing them in their technology. But if you do, your experience will be totally different. That's why I think it's funny when people are like, oh, he's always got his earbuds in and he's tuned out from the world. But turns out this guy is listening to a language course. Turns out that girl is listening to a podcast on how to improve the marketing of her business. And so we have an ability to consume content, but it has to be a conscious choice to consume content that helps us grow and challenges our perspectives versus just scrolling through BuzzFeed, which, hey, we've all done it. We've all been there.
Yeah.
But, okay.
Exactly.
So, Sophie, we have one more question, and it is our final question for the show. And this one is one of my favorites, and Donna says hi, and but she's off in the background. But we'll give you another chance to promote yourself before we wrap up. So we'll stick to the question here. You wait, Donna. You wait your turn. But the final question is this: we often will look at our experiences and say things like, if I'd only known that back then, things would be so different. So I think it's an interesting thing. I've heard many people give all different types of answers for this. Some say they wouldn't change anything. Some say they would give this advice. But if you could go back and talk to yourself at that time when you were graduating uni, and if you could go back knowing everything you know now and give yourself advice, what would that advice be?
It would be such a good question. I think it would be, we've already talked about this, I know, but I can't emphasize it strongly enough. It would be to ask for help and admit when I don't know what I'm doing. I've done a lot of things by like bluffing my way through stuff, bluffing my way through, job interviews or whatever, where you kind of talk yourself up a bit, and that's fine. But it's also fine to admit that you don't know something. It's absolutely fine, and people really respect that as well. People will really respect you when you go, hey, can you take some time to explain this to me? I'm not quite understanding it. I will understand it when I spend some time on it, but can you help me? There's no shame in doing that. I think it is shameful to pretend that everything is fine and pretend that you know what you're doing when you actually don't, because that's the point when you can start letting people down. And letting yourself down as well, because you're missing an opportunity to learn. I think asking for help and not worrying about it making you look stupid or like you're missing something. I think I did a lot of that when I was younger. I used to think that I had to be an expert in everything straight away when you absolutely don't. And one other thing I would add to that is that you've always got time. You've got heaps of time. You don't need to know all the answers right away. Like, you don't need to finish school and know what you're going to do for the rest of your life. I think a lot of people in our generation put that pressure on themselves, but you absolutely don't need to know. People change careers all the time, people change careers in their 40s. It's completely fine. You just find your own way of doing things and be open to learning the whole way, and you'll be absolutely fine.
Absolutely love it. Yeah, that whole concept of, rather than try and figure out the thing you want to do for the rest of your life and do it and be at that point, if you focused every day on learning something new, on experimenting with something, on introducing yourself to new experiences, your clarity on what your life is about and what really drives you will become it'll come to you so much quicker and so much brighter versus trying to have everything figured out before you get started. Because I really believe that is the way I use that in my life is procrastination. When I'm trying to make it perfect, it's my clever trick way of just not doing anything. But the more that we do and we get out and we experiment, we're willing to ask, we're willing to be eternally curious, life gets much more interesting. You learn more, you see more. And what I've found is those experiences that we get involved with will introduce us to who we really are inside, because we spend a lot of time trying to, like you said, pretend like we know everything, put on masks to cover ourselves. And by actually going out and being honest, being real, being vulnerable, we can really step into who we really are. So fantastic, Sophie. It was great having you on the show today. And before we wrap up, I want to just thank you for coming on all the way from Australia.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's a real privilege to have been able to chat to you. I think you're doing a wicked job with your show, and yeah, really, really chuffed that you asked me to come on the show. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie. And you're the first person who said I'm doing a wicked job, so I feel pretty awesome right now. And so before I let you go, just one more time, can you just repeat the references that you said earlier about where listeners can come to learn more about you?
So you can go Sophie Kneebone on Twitter, omnystudio.com. It's OMNY, Omny with a Y, studio.com. They're the two places that you can find me. If you start a podcast, you'll be talking to me directly. So yeah, if you're thinking of starting one, then come find me on there. Yeah, tweet me. Whatever you want to do.
Well, I'll tweet you once we launch this episode. But
Yeah,
Sophie, thank you so much. For all the listeners, that's going to be it for you guys today. Sophie, I'll ask you to hang on for 1 second before we wrap up. And for the listeners, guys, everything will be included in the show notes. So we'll give you the way to reach out to Sophie. Be sure to tweet her and let her know that you heard her on this interview. And tweet her what was the most valuable piece of advice that you got from this show, because there were tons. Sophie crammed a ton of valuable, really valuable advice into an hour. So I know you guys have something. So definitely tweet her what you found to be the most valuable piece. So listeners, that's it for you guys today. Thank you all for being with us.
Well, guys and girls, like I said, that piece of advice that Sophie gave is one of my favorite that I've heard yet on this show, because so much of my working career and my time just talking, connecting with people, I've heard so many say you need to be a specialist because that's where the money is, quote unquote. You need to be a generalist because you need to have a picture of everything that's going on in your world. And I've never heard someone frame it in the way to say, find 3 things that you're really good at, that light you up, that bring a ton of value, and combine them together so that you now have a unique value proposition that you can bring to clients, to your company, to the people that you're working with, and just to the world in general. Because we all have varying and differing interests. That's something that I think we often forget. And sometimes when we get into adulthood, we feel like we have to let go of certain pieces of ourselves. That, oh, that was something I just did when I was a kid. Oh, yeah, that thing that I loved with all of my heart and that thing that lit me up more than anything else. Well, I'm an adult now, so I can't be doing that anymore. But the reality is, if you're willing to think creatively, think outside the box, and be honest with yourself about what your unique gifts and talents are, then all of a sudden you can find ways to combine things so that you're creating something that has never existed before. So when it comes to what your unique skills, values, traits are, find them for yourself. Take the moment, write them down. Write down a bunch of things you're good at and pick 3 that you know really excite you. And if you could bring those 3 things into your life, would be unbelievably exciting. And it's not always things that are together. It's not like, well, I'm good at Excel and I'm good at Microsoft Word and I'm good at PowerPoint, so I should. No, that's boring. That's not exciting. And that's not what most people want deep at their core. When you say, I love performing and being in front of people, I love analyzing data, and I also love being outdoors. You might go, well, there's no way that can be combined, but I could probably give you 20 examples very quickly of how you could make that happen. Just think about all of the different ways that you could be that person that combines those 3 unique skill sets into something that is malleable and bendable, can be applied to different situations in different industries and different companies. So keep that piece of advice in mind, because that's one of my absolute new favorites and something that I'm applying to my life to say, what are 2, 3, 4 things that I want to bring to the table to say, listen, this is the unique value. This is Brian. This isn't an Excel expert. This isn't a good communicator. This isn't this, or this. It's not one thing. It is the combination of things that creates something that is greater than the whole is greater than the parts. So guys, thank you all for joining me today. Thank you for being a part of this. I love being able to share these types of stories and messages with you. And having Sophie on was really exciting and interesting to see how someone can play in so many different areas and find success and joy in all of them. Because for me, I'm like, I'd love to act at some point. I would love to go travel to this place. I would love to step outside of my comfort zone and try that thing that scares me. So having these reminders from someone like Sophie is so powerful. So keep in mind, Sophie is available. She's reached out. All of her contact information is linked in the show notes. So if you want to connect with Sophie, definitely do so. I cannot tell you how much my guests and I love it when you reach out to them and me, because it is so refreshing to know that not only are people listening, but that something in someone's story made a difference for that person. Because knowing that your story has value is one of the most powerful things for human beings because that gives us purpose, meaning, and reason for being here. So thank you all again for being with me today. If you would like to subscribe to the podcast, you can do so by searching for Overcoming Graduation on iTunes or on Stitcher. And if you'd be willing to provide a rating and reviews for the show and episodes, that would be massively, massively appreciated by me because that is one of the best ways to help me reach even more people. And also, if you're willing to share an episode that's particularly impactful with your friends and following, that is hugely helpful and beneficial for getting the show out to more people. If you want to learn more about Overcoming Graduation, you can visit overcominggraduation.com or check out the OCG community on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. If you'd like to learn a new Latin-based language in 90 days or less using a free giveaway that tells you the 9 steps to learn any Latin-based language in 90 days or less, you can visit overcominggraduation.com/language. And Latin-based languages would be Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese. So if you're interested in learning any of them, I definitely recommend you check that out because it explains the exact methodology I use to teach myself Portuguese. And if you would like to buy your copy of the #1 Amazon bestseller, The First Step, and support my team Triumph, a group that helps individuals with disabilities participate in endurance events, you can visit thefirststepgift.com to get your free book bonuses along with a link right to Amazon to buy your own copy of The First Step. Now, finally, guys, if you'd like to contact me directly for interview recommendations, to provide feedback on the show, to contact me for speaking engagements or book signings, or just to reach out and say hi, I would love to hear from you. And you can contact me at brian@overcominggraduation.com. So, guys, as always, thank you so much for being with me. It is great to share this with you and always happy to be a part of this. And, as always, I'll be talking to you again real soon.